I'm CWO4 Victor Pinion, U.S. Navy retired, telling some stories of my naval career. This one is part 3 of an attitude lesson that I'm presenting. For this particular story, I tell about how during my time in the Navy, how the ventilation system, the forced air ventilation systems were poorly maintained on every ship that I was stationed aboard. And the effect it had, the spaces were hot or cold in the wintertime, because the ventilation system would put the warm air to warm the space. Well, if the vent motor didn't work for whatever reason, it couldn't warm the space or cool the space. So people were hot. And other things affected it, like machinery, operating machinery would get hot. Hydraulic fluid would get hot. Great big hydraulic tanks of hot hydraulic fluid, hot hydraulic accumulators. They added heat to the spaces in addition to the sun shining on the deck directly above. But I discovered on every ship that I was ever stationed aboard, I was stationed aboard 5 of them, had pretty much the same problems. Different ships more difficult, more severe. The 2 most severe ones that I recall being stationed aboard were the USS Ranger and the USS Midway, CD-41. I went checking aboard the Ranger. I was a chief aboard the Ranger, catapult chief, B-2 Division leading chief, and at one point the only AB chief in the division. I went and inspected all of these ventilation systems. It wasn't just aboard the Ranger, it was Navy-wide during that era, and they'd come out with all other ships people having heat stroke and so forth, and illnesses, heat-related illnesses. And the Navy tried arranging that, but everything except repairing the ventilation systems. And I discovered the reason for that was ventilation system maintenance was viewed by everybody as not my job, somebody else's responsibility, and they're just not doing it well. Well, I discovered that if you involve yourself and you go troubleshoot these things, you make a trouble call to the engineering trouble call desk, and they send somebody up, usually a junior electrician, who's going to go, if he don't find anything wrong with the electrical function of it, well, he goes report nothing wrong with it electrically, and they cross it off the list, and it still doesn't get fixed. The ventilation, maybe the bearings are froze up and so it don't work. Maybe the filter is plugged up with debris because somebody gun-dacked or didn't do the monthly filter cleaning job, and on and on. And in some cases, I found that the crew didn't know where the push button was located to start it. And if they did, they viewed it as someone else's responsibility to push that button to turn the vent on. It was to that degree. And I discovered all of those things aboard the Ranger. And I discovered lots of them aboard the Midway also. But the most severe one was aboard the Midway. Catapult launch valve rooms were extremely hot. And when you were launching airplanes, you could not breathe in there. It was so hot, people couldn't live in there. Dripping condensed steam dripping on you if you go in, making little red spots all over you. And you're so hot, you just couldn't breathe in there. So people would go in there. Under certain circumstances, you were required to go in there. You had to grease bearings, you had to clean things, you had to vent hydraulic systems to vent the air out of them, and on and on and on. And in certain emergency situations, you had to go in there and verify mechanical counters to verify that the capacity selector valve was actually set at the commanded setting that the launching officer had commanded. Before I went aboard, when I was first recruited to go aboard, the lieutenant that recruited me for that job from an admiral staff had told me the machinery was in dismal condition and that it was an accident awaiting opportunity. Well, before I transferred from my shore duty base to the Midway, the very catastrophic fatal loss of aircraft accident occurred exactly like Lieutenant Dave Deese from Comfire Westpac had predicted. He told me it was a catastrophic accident awaiting opportunity. On the 8th of April, 1977, that accident happened off of Cat 1. Big Accident Investigation Board failed to determine the cause, exactly what failed, of the unexplained mechanical failure was the official report by the Accident Investigation Report. And I found that out when I went to school before I reported the board. And the school instructors knew about the accident, and they were aware of the accident JAG investigation reports of undetermined mechanical failure. I get aboard, and I shortly during my first seat period, I found them operating that catapult the same way that they had operated it when they lost that airplane off of it. And I stopped it immediately. And my investigation revealed why that space was so hot. It was the ventilation system that served it, an exhaust ventilation system and a supply ventilation system to supply fresh air to the space to keep steam from blowing back down there from the catapult trough and heating the space up so hot. The filter for that was missing, and heat radiator for it was plugged up with debris at least a foot thick. And we found a San Francisco Naval Shipyard newspaper in there and a Shop 72 yard worker helmet in that debris from 10 years ago. It had been plugged up like that for a decade, at least a decade. And I researched further and I discovered that V3 Division of the Air Department had responsibility to clean that vent filter once a month. But they couldn't find the space. So they gave up a decade ago, and they'd been gun decking that check, marking it off as completed every month for a decade. Different crews over a period of a decade. I got that corrected. We cleaned the system up, put a new filter in there, and now the space was cool enough to work in. But guess what? The accident investigation had determined that excessive heat in that space contributed to the accident. It boggles my mind that nobody had taken action to determine why and get that ventilation system working properly to cool that space until I personally did it. That boggles my mind. End of part 3. Y'all carry on.